Welcome back. All right. So, coming out of last night's game between Edmonton and Florida, which was a fantastic game, game 2, of course, going tomorrow night, I thought it might be fun to look at where last night's game ranks amongst my favorite game 1s in Stanley Cup final history. The Stanley Cup final is something very different. It is an event. It's a best of 7 that tells you who the best team in the league is that year, and it is some of the most fun watching hockey I've had. It's also been infuriating at times, but it is often unpredictable, and sometimes even when it's somewhat predictable, it's still fun to see how everything plays out. So I thought putting this and ranking it amongst the 10 favorite game 1s that I've watched in my lifetime, and this would go back to 81. So 81 would be the earliest that I could put on the board, as I didn't watch the Stanley Cup final any year before 81. Just keep that in mind as we go through this, so you're not going to see like 60s, because I wasn't alive then. Apologies. And I didn't watch hockey in the 70s, so apologies. But we start off with 1994. Yeah, so I'm going to go 1 through 10. Normally, of course, I do 10 through 1, but I figured 1 through 10 would be fun for this. So Vancouver won in overtime, 3-2 over the New York Rangers. Now, the New York Rangers won the series. So, my happiness wasn't necessarily that long for the world, but that was such an amazing game 1. No one expected Vancouver to give the Rangers much of a fight in that final, and then the Rangers got up 3-1, so they won the next 3, and then Vancouver forced a game 7 before ultimately bowing out. But what an amazing final. And that first game, I still remember I went to a friend's house and watched it. No, I didn't take any notes. I did not have a whiteboard. And it was fun. It was a really fun experience, and watching them win the game, especially in overtime in New York in Madison Square Garden, still to this day my favorite Stanley Cup final game 1. The number 2 ranked game 1 is another instance of a team that I cheered for. I should put the year on this. So 1994 for number 1. For number 2, Minnesota won 5-4. This is 1991 in Pittsburgh. The Minnesota North Stars in 1991 were not expected to go on a run to the Stanley Cup final. They had been terrible during the regular season, to be completely brutally honest, and then they went on an amazing run in the final and got that win in game 1. And I had that moment of, is Minnesota going to do this? Is a team that had, I think it was 68 points that year, are they going to win the Stanley Cup? Because everybody would have gone nuclear over that. But of course, Pittsburgh ends up winning. Lemieux gets his first of 2 straight Stanley Cups. And the Minnesota North Stars, unfortunately, become most known for the oh baby goal that Lemieux gets there against John Casey. Just, man, poor John Casey. You're just seeing Lemieux coming at him. Good luck with that. But it's still, game 1, Minnesota won that one 5-4. Third on the list. Look at that. Vancouver's on the list again. And this is back to 1982. Vancouver had 5 goals in that game. The problem is the New York Islanders had 6. That's an overtime win. This is 1982. The Vancouver Canucks were supposed to be basically run over by the Islanders. And the interesting thing is, it was a sweep, and it was obvious that the Islanders were the better of the 2 teams, but Vancouver made it close. They did. And if not for a dreaded turnover in that game, if Vancouver had won game 1, hey, they might have gone out in 5. I'm not going to be unrealistic. There was no way they were beating the New York Islanders. But game 1, they kept it close, and for me, that was the most emotionally invested I had been in a Stanley Cup final game to that point. To this day, it might still be the most emotionally invested I've ever been in a hockey game, because I believed the Canucks were going to win the Stanley Cup. And then the Islanders brought me down to earth pretty darn quickly. So number 4 is last night's game. I will rank the Edmonton Oilers winning that game, and it's another overtime game, which brings up another point here. I don't know why I wrote Vancouver and the Islanders there. We can just forget that I did that, can't we? People aren't going to let me forget. But because I don't need it. We already know. They're already on the board. That's why I've got the logos. But last night's game between Florida and the Oilers was ridiculously entertaining all the way through. And it's an overtime game. And it is not a coincidence that 3 of the top 4 are overtime games. Overtime in the Stanley Cup final is the most exciting that you can get. Other than single elimination dodgeball. Let's be honest here. But, yeah, so dodgeball fans, what's up? But, yeah, the fact that so many overtime games are in the top 4, I don't think will surprise people. The fact that 2 Canucks games are in the top 4. Interestingly enough, Boston, Vancouver in 2011, not on the board. What a boring game that was. That game was just, oh man, it was a 1-0 win for Vancouver. It was boring. Just not fun. All right, number 5 on the board, going back to 1984. Yep, and the Islanders are on the board again. So this was 1984. This was Edmonton, who had been defeated the year before. And they went into New York, played against the Islanders at Nassau, and beat them 1-0. The Edmonton Oilers, up until that 1984 Stanley Cup win for them, the argument was that they can't play defense. They can't keep the puck out of their own net, so there's no way that they're going to win a Stanley Cup. Spoiler alert, they did. And in the end, I wouldn't say they made it look easy necessarily, but they did win in less than 7 games. And the Edmonton Oilers were on their way to becoming a dynasty, as the Islanders had been a dynasty before them. Number 6 on the board. And this one is from the time when this channel is in existence as well. Going back to 2020. So the bubble playoffs. The bubble playoffs, of course, much discussed since then. The NHL players saying they would never go into a bubble again. They never needed to. But Dallas winning 4-1. I remember doing a review of that and saying, they're giving me hope. I knew that Dallas was in over their heads against Tampa in that final, but still, that game 1 was fantastic. The Anton Hudobin run being a lot of fun to watch. And so Dallas is on the board, Minnesota's on the board, and those are many decades removed from one another, but still, a lot of fun watching, and this is not an overtime game, much like this and this. So 3 of 6 are overtime games thus far. 7th on the board. Look at that, Boston's on the board. And it's the only Stanley Cup final game for Boston that made the cut. This is St. Louis and Boston. And it definitely looked like 2019 was going to go Boston's way at certain points in that series. And game 1 being an example. Boston winning 4-2. The 2013 game 1 against Chicago went to 3 overtimes. It gets an honorable mention. Although Boston not winning that game definitely keeps it outside the top 10. Just because this is for games that I enjoyed watching the most. That's why teams that I root for are on the board where they are. These are games that I really enjoyed for who I was rooting for, or just really, really, really good hockey. But Boston-Chicago was a close series. Chicago ends up winning it in 2013, but still pretty entertaining game 1 between the two teams. In this case, it's St. Louis and Boston from 2019. Highly entertaining as well. Boston wins the game, and then they'd lose 4 of the next 6 and not win the Stanley Cup final. Number 8. And we're going back to 2002 for this one. This is another case of a team that's the underdog getting a win. So Carolina in Detroit. 3-2 overtime win, and this is back in 2002. The 2002 Detroit Red Wings are seen by many as perhaps being the best Stanley Cup winner of, I would say, the last 50, 40 years, somewhere in that region. You look at that Detroit lineup in 2002, it's absolutely ridiculous how talented they are, how many Hall of Famers are on that team. But Carolina got that win in the first game in 2002. And with Irbe in net, I was really rooting for Carolina there. I really wanted to see Irbe get a cup ring. Because as a Canuck fan and being petty about them letting Irbe go, I thought, for the Canucks to decide this goaltender's too small to play for them, and then if he wins the Stanley Cup somewhere else, that's a very Canuck thing to happen. But in the end, Detroit does win the Stanley Cup, so Carolina winning the first game, just more of a footnote than anything. But, it's one of my favorite Stanley Cup final game 1s. And of the other ones that Detroit's been in, I would give an honorable mention to 1998 against the Capitals. A close game that ultimately did not go the way of the Washington Capitals, who I was kind of rooting for there. So, number 9 on the list. Not going back very far for this one. It's Tampa Bay and Colorado. This was a 4-3 win in overtime for the Colorado Avalanche. That was 2022. The Tampa Bay Lightning in their third straight Stanley Cup final that year. Colorado in their first Stanley Cup final in a long time. Colorado would win the Stanley Cup, and it starts with Game 1. So for the Colorado Avalanche, kind of a great game for them. It is an overtime victory. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5 overtime games. Yep, five of the 10 are overtime games. So number 10 is not an overtime game. But for the Tampa Bay Lightning, they were this close to maybe being that next dynasty to win 3 straight Stanley Cups. To become an actual official dynasty, you have to win 3 championships in 4 years. And I've seen people saying, well, they should change it to this and this, or that's not right, and this team should be considered a dynasty. I'm just telling you the official definition of a dynasty from a sports perspective is 3 championships in 4 years. It's just, I did not write that. I did not make that up. It's not something I have any control over. Which brings us to 10th on the list. And for 10th on the list, hey, look at that. The Oilers are on the board again. So the Oilers are on the board more than the Canucks, which, crazy, right? Although the Oilers do have a lot more Stanley Cup finals than the Canucks. But in 2006 against Carolina, this is the game, of course, where Dwayne Rollison gets hurt. Carolina wins 5-4. This game was absolutely insane. And Ty Conklin did his best to be able to replace Rollison, but nobody was going to replace Rollison. But what an entertaining game. And this was when I found out I was rooting for Carolina. Carolina won, and I kind of cheered, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm rooting for Carolina. I thought I'd be rooting for Edmonton. Sometimes I don't know until the game gets started. Last night I knew before the game got started. I think it would be great to see a Canadian team win for the first time in a long time, and at least quiet some of the complaints from some fans regarding Canadian teams and what they haven't been able to do for a long time. So 14 teams in the last 50 years have lost the first game and still ended up winning the series. The most recent, 2020 Tampa Bay, right here. 2019 St. Louis, right here. 2018 Washington, 2011 Boston. And Boston actually trailed 2-0 in that series. Both games won by Vancouver, and then Boston wins 4-5 to win the Cup. And 2009 Pittsburgh lost the first game, and then they would come back and they would win that series against Detroit, and that was the rematch from 2008. So I thought it would be fun to look at Game 1s. I've already done a video on my favorite Stanley Cup finals of all time, so I didn't feel like I needed to revisit that. I want to do something different, so there you go. My 10 favorite Game 1s that I've ever watched in the Stanley Cup final in my time watching hockey. Let me know your picks in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.